The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, everybody. It's Peter Dekom again. And today we're calling this Possibilities, Tech, and Numbers. But before I dive into the nefarious world of opportunities and technology growth, let me sort of rail about something, and that is numbers. Don't mind the kitty that's back there. She is doing very important discovery and research for me. But the numbers that we use are, for the most part, very arbitrary and highly fabricated. Let me start with one of my favorites, the poverty level. What the hell is the poverty level? And why do we measure it? Why is it relevant? And why do we use it? In the world of support, whether it's for SNAP benefits or Medicaid or other kinds of benefits, federal or otherwise, there is something called a poverty level, which was created under the Johnson administration back in the late 60s. And it's basically an attempt to say, okay, who gets benefits and who doesn't? Well, remember, we still have the same minimum wage we had in the 1990s, $7.25. I think you can make a really luxurious lifestyle out of that. But the idea of these poverty level numbers was to make sure that those in the United States were, being taken care of. There's a problem with that. The way they're calculated, the way it's all put together, is based upon assumptions that existed in the 1960s. Where they took a number $3,000 and they figured out how much of that you needed to spend for various levels of things. And then every year, they would look at certain big items, food and stuff, and they would increase it by the cost of living every year. There's one tiny mistake that they make that makes a whole damn number meaningless, and that is housing. What they basically did is say, okay, whatever your housing is, it's going to be 30% of your income. And we're going to assume that every year the cost of a house goes up by the cost of living index. That is about as stupid and absurd as any number I could possibly imagine. Anyone who's been in the housing market and say, gee, this house went up 40% in 2 years or 30% in a year, you look at that and say, wait a minute, it didn't go up CPI, it went up 10 times the CPI. Well, those numbers are never adjusted. So when you look at that, and the poverty index is also a factor of how many people are covered by an income. And very, very interestingly, there's no way in heaven or hell for you to live in almost any city, I won't even say major city, in the United States at anywhere near that poverty level number. You have to live in a slum, and you might be able to adopt a few roaches and a rat or two, but you are not going to be able to live in a habitable dwelling. It's just not going to happen. And so you look at that and you think, well, what is the cost of living that is a poverty line? Don't laugh at this. So people in New York City trying to figure out how you live in New York City and work there figured out that the poverty line for New York City should be $140,000. And they may be right. I certainly can't imagine living in New York for less than 7 figures a year, but I don't live in New York, and that may be a leading reason why. But all of this stuff goes into the factor, what the hell do I do with my life? And I'll start once again with a blatant statement. I hate to turn on my friends, but the boomers have blown it out their anal cavities. We did not leave you in good shape. Gen Z, we are looking at Gen Alpha and the next generation popping up. Now, I'm going to have 2 of them in that, grandkids. But all I can tell you is we blew it. Remember that old guns and butter thing I had way back in the beginning of this podcast, if you were listening to that? It was a statement that basically when you fight a war, you have your choice. Pay for it or borrow. But the one thing you can't do is lower taxes during a period of war. Wars are really, really expensive. Manpower, weapons that are blown up, lost, development of new weapons. That's ridiculous. So The economists call it guns or butter, and or is a very interesting word. It's not guns and butter, because if you have a war and you cut taxes, you're going to blow the deficit through the stratosphere. Oh, we did that. We did that during the Vietnam War, cut the taxes. We did that during the Afghan, Iraq wars, cut the taxes. It doesn't matter what war we've been in. You have a Republican Party that is dedicated to the proposition, and if you cut taxes, the economy grows. That has never happened. They use something called the Laffer curve, and I have to tell you, it's well named because I laugh at that curve. There is no way that that happens. A rising tide only floats all yachts. It doesn't float all boats. So all these economic assumptions are presented in a narrative that sounds delicious, but it's toxic, and it's wrong, and it's mendacious. They're lying through their little fuzzy teeth. So as you look at all the things that are in the future, let's do some generalizations. As long as Trump and company are in power, there are very few areas where you want to go and work for the government or for government-funded research. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll get some stuff coming back. Healthcare under RFK Jr. is disappearing. You're not looking at research in that area. So if you're a researcher or working in a laboratory in that area, it's not necessarily a growth area unless it's completely funded by private money. That's kind of strange. You think, well, no, don't worry. He's a very unpopular member of the cabinet. Actually, you may not like this, but RFK Jr. and Pete Hegseth are two of the most popular people in Trump's cabinet. Huh? The people that people don't like Scott Bessent because he's an arrogant little guy worth half a billion bucks through his financial machinations, has no empathy for ordinary Americans. And then you have the private law firm that caters to one single solitary client, Pam Bondi's Department of Injustice. And she, by the way, when we look at the polls, is the least popular member of the Trump cabinet, mostly due to the way she's handling the Epstein matter, but she's not doing it because it's what she wants to have done. The boss made a statement, don't let it out, and he doesn't have to say another word. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. However, if she gets sufficiently unpopular, there's a bus waiting for her, and maybe it'll run over her. But I will tell you, through all of this stuff, as the government goes through an period of massive instability, inconsistent policies, etc., what you're trying to do is to figure out, okay, where do I go? If you are going into AI, one of the things I will warn everybody about is if you don't have a lot of specialized knowledge about AI, those jobs are taken by other people who are getting paid alarming amounts of money. But as recent Stanford University comp sci engineering graduates will tell you, they can't find jobs because the Silicon Valley is not interested in hiring people who are not intensively AI. I get it, but that isn't very refreshing when you're in college. You spend a lot of time doing a lot of complicated stuff, and it's going to get more complicated. But there are opportunities in AI because, frankly, it goes to a very, very simple, my cat taught me this, or she's back there. She said, and she knows about this, she actually heard it from some raccoons, garbage in, garbage out. And the problem with generative AI is most of what's going into it is unfiltered, hallucinating garbage. So if you're using that format in your AI, you're going to have a problem because ultimately your knowledge, your hallucinations, and all the other stuff coming out the other side are going to be flawed. So one of the areas in AI that needs to be addressed, aside from the fact that we have absolutely no guardrails, as someone once said, it's like building a car with no brakes, a stuck accelerator pedal, and no seatbelts. That's what AI is in the United States. And we're having competing forces, and it's all kinds of good fun there. So what really needs to happen and where the jobs are going to pop in, and there are people who are absolutely solving these problems, and a number of companies, I'll let you research which ones they are actually going through and creating automatic filtration systems that will filter garbage out of the input and will make it infinitely more accurate. As those systems start tracking accuracy and they start checking it through additional sources, and they question things that look weird, you're going to see a much more effective AI doing stuff. Yeah, the motion picture and television industries are having a great time replacing actors, and the actors are having a great time thinking about what the hell to do about it. There are things that will happen or have happened, and that is if you create a completely, fake actor, and there's some pretty amazing ones out there. I've actually seen, it's hard to tell. You can't tell them from real people. And SAG has basically said, great, you pay that fake actor as if they were a real actor, only that money goes into our pension and health program. Okay, that's a solution, but it doesn't actually create more jobs. On the other hand, can you stop it? And the answer is probably not. I do remember, and I say this is one of my paradigms that I use, is back in the turn of the 20th century, there were towns that would not let automobiles into the towns because the backfiring engines scared the horses. No matter what anybody thinks, AI is here to stay. We're going to have a huge bubble. It's going to go into toilets. Some companies will die in the process. The big ones will persevere because they've got enough money to stand anything. But I think a bubble is probably a healthy thing. On the other hand, if you are looking at the stock market as an index of our wonderful presidential success, somewhere north of 80, up over even 90% of the growth in the stock market has been completely and totally driven by artificial intelligence companies. So that's not healthy, because if one segment of the economy has a big hiccup, it takes the whole economy down. But it goes back to that paradigm that I spoke about when I began this podcasting, is there's certain things on this planet that you cannot use to determine whether or not there's a success there. And the biggest determinant, unless you're actually a company where your shares are being traded and you get a piece of that action, the stock market is the worst index of success on the planet, followed very rapidly by the gross domestic product, GDP, and stock prices. I'm going to go into why it's so terrible. First of all, you have probably under 5 to 10% of the country who make their primary livings off the stock market. And the ones who have the largest stakes in those stock markets are the tech bros, the science, the billionaires and the centimillionaires. They really do, in fact, make money from stock, and they have information that you couldn't get under any circumstance. So when you think you're doing the research, what you're not hearing, and it would be an illegal insider trade if you did, is what's going on inside their pea brains. But they're making money hand over fist. And they have sort of cabals of rich people who invest in each other's stocks, so that if I invest in your stock, it goes up. You invest in my stock, it goes up. And we're all doing very, very well. You look at the compensation of CEOs of publicly traded companies, and you say, well, I see these guys making 50 million, 100 million. One guy made 200 million a year. How is that ever going to be justified? Well, if you look at who's on the boards of directors of the companies where those pay scales are approved by the board, you actually look at a bunch of people who are themselves CEOs. So they don't want to set a pattern where CEOs get paid less, because someone will figure out, well, why are we paying you this ridiculous amount of money? And if you look at Mr. Musk, he's got a deal where he is paid based on growth of the company. Basically, he has $1 trillion bonus. Oh, I like that. I like to get that job, but it's ridiculous. And this overpayment of executives is more divisive than almost any other policy in the United States. So you want to figure out what the hell to do. Where is the future? Well, it's fascinating to me that we have an administration that doesn't have a clue, blank, 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 about what it's doing. Tariffs are good. Look, it's working. We're making money. Tariffs are bad. Prices are up. We have inflation. No, inflation, we don't have inflation. We only have certain things that are higher. Yeah, the things that matter to us, like rent and homes and food. Oh my God, I eat food still. Maybe it's a bad habit. I need to chuck that habit. Meanwhile, the rich get richer and richer and richer. And I'm going to go through a little thing in here because Mr. Ellison made some money recently. Well, he didn't actually make money cash, but remember how we were trying to get TikTok into an American company? a consortium of which Larry Ellison, Mr. Oracle, and who also is the father of David Ellison, Mr. Paramount Skydance, and basically bought stuff. They want to take this company, which is directly feeding information into the People's Republic of China, and make it an American company and leave the Chinese equity holders with a tiny little piece. Okay. The estimated value of TikTok US is $40 billion. The sale of TikTok America, because we blackmailed them and said, if you don't sell this company to American shareholders, we're going to take it away from you. So a $40 million asset sold for $14 billion. We're having fun. And Mr. Ellison benefited very, very, very big time on that one. He basically got a $12 billion windfall in that purchase price. Fine. Okay, great. TikTok's still there. All the people can do all the silly videos and all this stuff going. What I find fascinating is Donald Trump, who now has merged his company into a fusion company. We'll talk about fusion in a second. He basically has said, okay, I'm going to move my weird media company into a fusion company. We'll talk about fusion. The push-pull here is that AI sucks down electrical power like crazy, and electrical power remains illusory because we need it, but we ain't generating it. And Trump's saying, well, we just need to burn more carbon and more fuel oil and gasoline, diesel fuel, whatever, and we'll have enough. But nobody's actually figured out how to even make that much electricity using fossil fuels. So even if you want to do it, we can't. We don't have the plants necessary to generate electrical power from burning coal and any other fossil fuel. But we need the electricity. And we were getting there. We had hydroelectric power. You'll notice some of these big file server warehouses are located near hydroelectric plants. You look also at the fact that we were beginning to do a lot with wind power. But according to Donald Trump, and it's an interesting story that I'll go into in a second, wind power blows. And that's in the bad sense. It seems back in 2006, he was buying some properties in Scotland. I tell you, in Scotland, we got some great golf courses here, and I'll taught you how to play it. So he was buying these things out there, and the wind was blowing, and there was nothing there but beautiful ocean views. But apparently, the UK, Scotland, decided it would be a good idea if we took these massive winds that are blowing off coastal Scotland and put giant wind turbines up there and turn it into electricity. Well, Mr. Trump did not like that. He calls them windmills because it sounds old-fashioned. They're not windmills, they're wind turbines. Windmills basically turn a grindstone around and you can make, grind wheat and corn and stuff like that. Wind turbines create electricity. And even if those things don't look like they're spinning fast enough to generate alarming amounts of electricity. So one day, Trumpy Poo goes to play some golf and looks up and he sees these windmills. I see windmills. They're not windmills, doob. They are wind turbines. And he looks at them and he says, I hate what they do to the view. They're going to kill Scottish tourism. People won't play golf in my courses. So he started litigation. He loves lawyers who don't get paid ultimately seem to like him at the inception because they figure he's going to use them a lot and then he'll make a lot of money. Doesn't quite work that way all the time. He negotiates his bills, doesn't pay at all. Sometimes he does. But in any event, he is suing the crap out of everybody. And he's lost every lawsuit involving the turbines. Every one of them. Went up to the highest courts in Scotland. They destroyed him. He then turned around and filed in the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court actually didn't give him that one. First of all, why would the U.S. Supreme Court have jurisdiction over wind turbines in Scotland? They don't. So he lost that too. But in that process, Trump continually doubled down. He built another course. It had, again, these courses tend to be located with magnificent ocean views, which also happens to be where you harvest magnificent ocean breezes. So he did it again, had the same battle, lost it again. And you can see where Donald Trump's antipathy for wind power and ultimately expanded a little bit, solar power, anything other than fossil fuels, where it came from. It was a double down from the 2006 on against people who were saying we have to have wind power because he didn't like the way they looked. Okay, so we're not going to have that. And recently, on Monday, the 22nd of December, the Trump administration said we are canceling all wind leases that we gave in offshore wind turbines. We're just canceling it. And obviously, it's going to go to the court. It's gone to the courts once. It's been reversed. It said, no, you can't cancel a lease. You can't take that property. It's depriving someone of due process. Of proper fair market value of what the government is saying. You're having a taking, you're stealing it from me. Well, Trump's coming used to dealing with stolen stuff like elections in his mind. But at this point, he's trying to shut him down. And so I will have to say that maybe that's not the place you want to invest or spend time. But there's some interesting stuff on that, and we'll go into it in a second. Because there are red states, and I have to give some real serious credit to Wyoming and the governor there, who's a Republican governor. But Wyoming is a very contradictory state. You think of it as bright, deep, pungent red. It's also the first place in the United States where women got to vote. That's why they call it either the cowboy state or the equality state. So what's happened in Wyoming, one of the largest coal producers in the United States, is the governor said, okay, look, we're going to be more agnostic about this. We have lots of wind here. You're welcome to build stuff here. We'll even have government incentives if you build that wind power here. And we will be very happy to accommodate you. And there's a whole lot of very rich people investing in wind power, solar power, and other things in Wyoming. So for those of you looking for growth, hey, there are red states out there that figured out how to do alternative energy. Ignore the president of the United States because he doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. But these governors are smart. And I will tell you, Wyoming is doing very, very, very well as a result of this. There's also a little technology, before I get into one more electrical power, because it's very difficult to explain, and you're probably going to make fun of me when I try to make explanations. But we have another thing that we were doing that is really interesting. It's called carbon capture. Carbon capture happens in nature with green plants, in the ocean, in forests, etc. We know that. Plant more plants, get more carbon removed. And there are now technologies which are basically taking carbon instead of, when it comes out of nasty smoke pipes, instead of pumping it directly into the ground, there are now processes that take that carbon dioxide, whatever methane, whatever is coming out, and converts it to something else. And that something else has uses. And one of the uses is actually building roads. You are now able to take captured carbon and create a thinner layer of what looks like asphalt. It's blended with all kinds of interesting stuff, and use it for building roads. And it's really quite good to capture carbon, use it, and then it lasts really long. It costs more than traditional asphalt, but you don't need as much. So in the end, it costs a lot less. As people start looking at this, there's one more thing. It doesn't stink to high hell whenever you've walked near an asphalt, road going in, and you take a deep breath, if you can finish that breath without gagging. This stuff doesn't need to be heated. It can be used and layered without the need of having that high heat, which not only creates unfortunately unpleasant working conditions in the summer, it also releases those disgusting toxic fumes that you have experienced every time you've gone by a road project. So guess what, ladies and germs? That technology has a lot going for it, and is beginning to be played out. And if you're interested in doing that, well, you know what? It's not too bad. There's also a company in Austin, Texas, that does something kind of weird. You know how we have 3D printing? this company in Austin does 3D printing of entire buildings. And it's a beautiful thing to see when it basically does it. It just have a machine that spits out a certain kind of concrete that's automatically reinforced. And it does it sort of it's like layer on top of a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer going around. And that technology is going to be one of the ingredients. If we learn how to do it, A, we can build structures on other planets, and B, we can build homes in the United States for a whole lot less money if we can scale it up, and we can scale it up. So there's something else to contemplate. I think that's super cool. And the way that stuff looks when you ooze it out, and it's like toothpaste tube of concrete, and you can make weird, cool, curved walls, all computer-controlled designs, absolutely stunning, absolutely beautiful, and it can be scaled like crazy, and buildings go up really fast. Instead of having weeks and weeks to do it, you can probably build this structure in a week or two. I think that is incredibly spectacular. We also have another form of carbon capture, and that is giant machines which suck carbon dioxide and methane out of the atmosphere. In other words, it's not attached to a smokestack. It's in a place where there's a lot of pollution, and these machines will pull that carbon out of the atmosphere, convert it into something else, or in certain cases, actually shove it deep within the earth. But mostly, they're beginning to take it out of the atmosphere, and I think that's absolutely spectacular. So those of you who are interested in cleaning up the world, that works. And a lot of it is basically privately funded because we're state funded. So you're not functioning on a federal government that pretends that carbon is not a terrible, terrible environmental destroyer. And one of the fun things to realize is this government has a huge stake in lying to you. Pull out the EPA reports on climate change. You'll see, and if you look at the older versions, so you have them a side-by-side comparison, they have deleted pages and pages of empirical evidence of how environmental pollution is taking place. Today, 99% of scientists who are trained in a relevant science base believe that man has caused climate change. So you have all this being erased from the public record if you have the old one, and there are people who are writing and doing side-by-side comparisons. It's terrifying when you sit there and say, this is a theory, it hasn't been proved, there's no evidence, and they deleted 30 pages of evidence. So it's clear that the government is not going to be the source for a lot of encouragement. And in the medical field, as we see, the government is cutting funding the CDC is cutting funding for medical research. You are basically looking at all those beautiful jobs being replaced by conspiracy theorists with no serious medical credentials, or who had medical credentials but no longer used them and no longer consider them relevant. So if you're going to go into that area, let me suggest that there are states like California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, etc., that are doing it either by themselves or in consortium with other states similarly inclined, who are hiring these people out of the CDC, people with a kind of engineering experience to deal with not just engineering, but medical healthcare experience to deal with these issues and to keep mRNA vaccine research going as the government is beginning to say, okay, we like this conspiracy theory, we like that one, but this factual one, it doesn't jibe with the head of the agency or the head of the government. If we can't call it a hoax, we don't want it. And we don't want it if we can call it a hoax. I don't like hoaxes too much, but I'm actually building up my courage to tackle something that I'm actually totally terrified of. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. But right, we're looking at carbon capture, big future in that. We're looking at red states with money. That would include places like Wyoming, and there are other states that are doing this as well. And you don't have to have fear that this technology is simply going to vaporize and no one's going to pay attention to it. It's very important that we have carbon capture. It's very important that we do alternative energy, and it's not dead. What we are doing is we're killing our economic future. Right now, 74% of global investment in alternative energy is China. We're not doing it. They are selling basically 3 times the number of automobiles we sell into the global marketplace, and virtually all of them are EVs. We're just not in it. And if you look at Ford recently told its employees, there are 25,000 who used to work remotely. If you don't come to work 4 days a week, we're going to fire your butt. So it's not a comfortable place to work. And there have been lots and lots of layoffs in the automotive sector. Entire plants are shutting down because the cars that they were building, EVs or hybrids, are not in demand in the United States because we now have officially labeled climate change to be a hoax, and therefore, why would you build a car that caters to climate change? We have stopped building stopped accelerating the building of charging stations. And that's stupid, because that means if you buy one of these lovely vehicles, you can't charge it unless you have your own charging station, or you find a couple of them on the way that work, or you have a charging station at work. None of this is good for us. None of this is going to help the country grow. None of it's going to create more jobs. But for those of you out there who are looking for stuff to do, don't give up. Because out there is a very interesting change in all kinds of things. You know how China has all these rare earths? And one of the key things that they look at when they're building stuff, if you understand how your cell phone works or whatever, it's based very heavily on magnets. Little teeny magnets. They're basically used for triggers, for speakers, for all kinds of stuff. But what these little teeny magnets have been able to do is to miniaturize the components in your phone. If you had taken this and wanted to build the same technology in your phone in the 1970s, it would take up half a room. Now it's in this little teeny thing called a smartphone, cell phone, whatever. So guess what? There are companies in the United States. One's called, I think it's NIRON, Neron. It's basically said, okay, we can make these things from other metals, and we can manufacture them at a price that is way below the cost of buying these rare earths from China. So we can go and build these things beyond the metals that we're used to. We can bring the price down, and we can be less dependent on China. Well, that kind of innovation is an excellent, excellent spur. So if you're an engineer and you're not building an AI system, good, thank you. That's my gratitude here. There are technologies that simply make life better, generating electricity, cleaning up the environment, making the components for small electronics, including smartphones, out of metals we have in abundance here. And we're basically able to build one of the weakest links in this entire system are batteries. A salt you can get anywhere. Just ask ICE. But batteries, they're really a problem. If you look at them, first of all, they're yucky. They have things like lithium in them now, and there are going to be other batteries that are going to be based on aluminum, or as the British call it, aluminium. But it is absolutely a place where there's a lot of research and a lot of growth. Unfortunately for us, since batteries are used to store electricity, China basically is saying, okay, we'll build those batteries. We want to store electricity. The Trump administration, why would we want to emphasize batteries? You know, we basically can generate electricity in real time by burning coal, burning diesel fuel. That's a little push-pull we really don't want to have. But if we do it right, we can basically take over the supply chain from China and make it soar. Now there's another cool technology, and it's in the nuclear power areas. I'm going to segue into that. And one is a sodium-based nuclear reactor. It's actually being built. And yes, Bill Gates put a lot of money into the research. And what it does, liquefied sodium heats can have much higher temperatures than steam. So if you heat up liquid sodium, you can heat it up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit as opposed to 200, 300 degrees for water, and you can generate more power out of that with more stability. Let's face it, liquid sodium is not as volatile as water, which when it spills out, it goes everywhere, takes the nuclear waste with it. So these sodium-based nuclear reactors are actually spectacular. So far, all the tests are good. And I'm sorry, I don't like nuclear waste either. I look down at my midsection and hope it's not a nuclear waste. But ultimately, we would wish that we didn't have to do that. But we can't figure out a way. Even we go full bore on alternative energy through geothermal, through all kinds of fun solar, wind, etc., we're not going to have enough electricity to meet the absolutely super hyper accelerating demand for electricity, which is totally and completely built and being driven by artificial intelligence. So that is not a fun thing. So let's go and deal with the magic. Oh, yes, play music here. Not music, but the music here would be rising very high, and we would be dealing with something called fusion. Fission is where you basically blow something up. It generates a lot of power, and it's what we use in traditional reactors and what we use in nuclear weapons. Fusion, on the other hand, is putting two things together, like two heavy helium atoms, and exploding them together, and that togetherness creates energy, which ultimately powers and generates electricity. Fission blows stuff up and leaves, how do we say this, Hiroshima-like, which is a small nuclear device these days, nuclear waste in its wake. We don't want that. Fission is all the reactors, whether it's Chernobyl or any number of 3 Mile Island, all the stuff that's out there, we don't want those anymore. So we can actually build safer reactors. What do you do with the waste? Well, there's less of it with a sodium-based reactor, but it's still a problem. But until we are able to figure out how to generate enough electricity, burning fuel causes absolutely massive damage compared to the damage done in trying to figure out what to do with nuclear waste. By the way, China does not have a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. We do, but then again, it's a big fat target, and it's easy to decimate with the flood of drones. Okay, so let's go into fusion. For a long time, there was this notion that we could have cold fusion. What is cold fusion? Well, that's where you take the particles that you're going to bombard with a beam of something, and you put them in a space, and you don't have massive amounts of heat in that space. What you do is because a lot of the temperatures that people are dealing with here are so high, they would melt any container known to man. So, okay. What they did, and this is kind of cool, but they didn't actually wind up pulling it off, is to take the particle that's going to get bombarded and fused into another particle, and they have to do this 60 times a second. So you have 60 cycles in terms of generating electricity, is they would take the particle that's going to get hit and suspend it in a magnetic field, hit it with the particle beam, and then that would generate energy and would be instantaneous and very small and contained. You could even put your hand into that reactor right after the explosion, and you would not feel any heat whatsoever because it dissipates so fast. Well, they worked on that for years and years and years. A lot of companies are trying to figure it, but trying to hold something into stasis in a little teeny magnetic field and change it 60 times a second, bomb, 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 is a little bit tough. Someone said we did it, and MIT said, okay, show us. Let us take a look at this. MIT worked on it, and maybe someday they're going to get it done, but MIT could not figure out how to do it with this cold fusion. They said, no, we're going to have to use massive amounts of heat, and we're going to have to do it. But let's see how we do it. Where do we get the power to generate the heat? Okay, we need more electricity again, but it should, if it's done properly, generate much more electricity than it takes to make that happen. So what you're doing with fusion is you're superheating two heavy hydrogen, atoms and you're banging them with a very major amount of heat, and you're forming something called, helium. Other than it makes you, talk funny when you breathe it in and try to talk, helium is inert. It doesn't cause any major damage. It isn't going to be a horrible effluent that pollutes all of our lakes and rivers. It's just helium. So fusion is a place where we are working and where it looks like we will, in fact, succeed. The only massive fly in this ointment is that Donald Trump just moved his company to merge with a nascent fusion company. So I don't know what that means, because I don't think anything happens where Trump's involved, where there isn't some sort of distorting bias done within the government to make that look successful. I'll never trust any numbers that come out of it. I mean, Donald Trump has made more money in office or through his presidential office by the billions than any other, forget about maybe all the presidents in the United States in their history. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to accept that as a viable company. Nonetheless, they may get some wonderful government contracts that allow it to be successful, because if you're in that, what if he's not president anymore? Well, it's his family that's going to inherit all this stuff. There are other things that are going out there that need work. And I actually would like to see people take some of the technologies that already exist, and while people are trying to expand exponentially what they do, I would like to see them focus on making them work on a lower level. That's what China's doing. China said, okay, if we put AI into every car we make, every appliance we make, and every cell phone that we use, if we really focus on making sure that is in every conceivable electronics manufacturer that we make, well, here's what happens. The world starts getting on the Chinese standard of AI, whatever it is, even if we don't have the super stuff. But that is obviously a very interesting way. The United States has not chosen to go that route. The United States is putting money into AI as a massive generator of wealth. And people say to these big companies that are putting billions, if not trillions of dollars into AI research, you're not making any money. So how do you justify your existence? And I'm telling you, this has come out of some of these companies. I won't mention their names, but they're household words. And they say, okay, we're going to ask AI how to make money. And they're going to tell us how to make money, and then they will tune it as we move through the process. So we're building these AI monsters, and we're going to ask them to help us make money. Obviously, it's a little more sophisticated than that, but that's the answer that they're giving us. We also have to start dealing with some other realities. We're going to have self-driving everything. Sorry, Tesla, you're not being accepted by California because it's not particularly wonderful. Sorry, Waymo, when you had a power failure in San Francisco, all your damn cars stopped, and that was kind of creating a little traffic jam there. There are all kinds of little things in navigation. When it rains, how does a car that's never experienced rain deal with it? What happens when there's a bicycle or something that's not familiar? Part of the self-learning program is to make self-navigating vehicles safer. There is a huge amount of work in that stuff. So all I can tell you, if you don't believe it, I do. So that's enough for you, right? No, okay, it's not. We also have plasma computing that is going to happen. And plasma computing is basically, how do I say this? If it would take one existing supercomputer in our world today, a petaflop capable calculating computer or array of computers, it would take something like, let's say, 1 million years to do a very complicated calculation. A plasma-generated calculation could take an hour, a day, a week, not more than that. So look at what you can do with that level of calculations. The problem with the plasma computers is they had to be at like 400 degrees below zero in a completely stable environment, and they weren't 100% reliable. Well, guess what, sports fans? Japan has created a plasma computer that works more along the line of ordinary conditions. And so as that plasma computer, which can literally calculate 1,000,000 times faster than what we've got now, it's going to blow the world apart. And that's a good thing or a bad thing. When bad actors get their hands on something like that, they can go through any blockchain, security system in a matter of seconds. But plasma computing is clearly on the horizon. And instead of being binary, X's and O's, it works with qubits. And qubits are 4 levels, all of whom can process multiple tasks at the same time using the same computer. So you can actually use a plasma computer, and the way they're doing it, it's really kind of interesting. It's nothing new, but it's kind of the way we deal with cloud computing. And that is, okay, you guys, engineers, companies, scientists, whatever, want to use our plasma computer. Okay, great. We will have a system where you can address it. We will give you part of that computer for like 4 hours or 5 hours, and you pay for it. You calculate it, and it works. So the shared computer system is probably the way we're going to go in the short term until we learn how to miniaturize and drive that technology into something that you can have in your own whatever, office, home, phone. All we know is all these technologies that used to take up massive amounts of space don't. I mean, you think about Apollo 11 when they were landing on the moon, and figure that your smartphone has more computing power than all the computing power involved in that go to the moon and back moment, you realize how fast things happen. It was, it's been, 1903, 06 or whatever, and Orville and Wilbur took off. And we're like a century and a quarter from that. Look what's flying around up there. I don't want to drone on and oops. Well, before I go lost in a bevy of puns, I think I'll shut my boosh. I am done. I'm going to turn myself over to my able assistant. There she is. It's Amanda Fleming, a lawyer, a dancer, a very accomplished producer. My producer, what kind of crap are you going to throw at me today?
Well, I'm going to go with a question that has to do with numbers on a macro scale. It involves people who are in the technology world and have high numbers when it comes to their net wealth. And we look at, I'm not even going to name names, but the highest
tech bros. Okay, next.
So, what's the wealth of like the top 4 wealthy people in our country?
I don't know what the top 4 are, but pretty much 1% of the wealth in the United States owns 60 or 70% of the assets in the country. It's also interesting when you look at, and I'll throw a little example here. Let's say you're going to do a GDP analysis, and we have basically 10 people in the cohort. 1 makes $1 billion a year, and 9 make $100,000 a year. What's the average? It's gonna be huge. I mean, if you average, that billion is so huge that it's going to make the average look like it's hundreds of, a couple of $1,000,000 a year. But none of those people are enjoying that lifestyle, which tells you average is garbage. GDP is governed by, if a lot of rich people suddenly make even more money, GDP goes up, but it doesn't tell you how the money is spread among people. And your question was, what about this incredible wealth gap? Earnings gap. And the answer is the system that we have now, cutting taxes for the rich who don't need it, basically giving them subsidies through depreciation or having certain kinds of taxation, like the carried interest rules for the funds that are basically the fund managers who are funding this stuff, and also basically giving them the government contracts. This is going to come as maybe a shock to everybody. There's probably not a billionaire technology out there that grew completely on its own with no assistance from the government. Pretty much, I guarantee you, almost everybody, and Elon Musk is high on the list, got help from the U.S. government. He got direct loans, subsidies, supports, and research grants from the Department of Energy a long time ago. He now has, he's now close to being a trillionaire. And you're looking at that and say, oh, he's a self-made. Bull crap. He's self-made, but you, the taxpayers, put money into that man to help make him wealthy. And then when his technology got sophisticated enough, you, the taxpayers, through your government, have given him contracts to do stuff that we used to have the government do, like, NASA, going to space, designing satellite communication system. Why are we giving this to? Because that's the way the government has been redesigned. It was not designed that way in the beginning. And until you start creating a real tax schema where people with that kind of wealth get taxed, and you actually may have to do something the Republicans will go to the bathroom and spew when you even hear these words, and that is to tax wealth directly. If someone's worth more than $1 billion or $2 billion, low bucks there, right? You have an obligation as a government to tax that. Think about, do you think property tax is fair? Well, it's a property tax. You own a certain property, you make a lot of money, and you pay tax. If you have a big house, you pay more tax. If you have a big wealth asset base, you pay more tax. We have people in Congress who go to the bathroom immediately and spew anytime they hear taxing wealth. Well, I'm sorry, folks, the system we have today does not work for 90% of Americans.
How much do the tax bros each, how much are they worth each? Estimates.
I would say none of the tech bros are worth less than $100 million. And most of the tech bros are worth $100 billion. I'm sorry, I misspoke. And there are a lot of them in there who make more than that. But when you're talking about someone having 10 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion, just think about what you would do if you had 20 billion. Look at the aircraft that they drive, the yachts they're in, the number of homes they have. It's absurd for someone to have that kind of wealth. They don't need it.
So let's ask you, if you were a peer of the tech bros, financially speaking, obviously intellectually you are.
Goodbye. I'm out of here.
And you had over 100 billion. I think some of them have over 200 billion.
Absolutely.
How many people are on this earth?
A little over 8 billion.
Okay, so if you had that kind of money, and we're just talking numbers, would you hand out $1 billion to each person on earth? You'd still be left with over $100 billion. I'm just talking numbers. It seems like, why doesn't somebody do that? And then I understand maybe it's not liquid. Maybe there's
let's just, even if it were liquid, if you did that, money wouldn't mean anything. So better than having money is take the people who need things, help them learn how to get that stuff, teach them skills, provide them medical care, make sure they have food, give them the stuff that, the lifestyle. Right now, you look at Gaza. I mean, Gaza is like, there's nothing there other than rubble. And can you imagine if instead of what's there today, you had a bunch of high rises with basically 500 to 1,000 square feet apartments? You had grocery stores, you had schools, colleges, hospitals, you had shopping centers, you had tech, you had people being trained to do specific technology. Basically I see today that junior colleges and tech schools are in many cases a whole lot more valuable than college. And to give them skills, create factories there, to use those skills, and to live in homes that are fine. How many people would be, quote, terrorists if they had a car, a house, a garage, and a good job? You don't see a lot of working people who are paid a fair wage and have a good lifestyle, the old chicken in every pot. You don't see them basically becoming terrorists. They got too much to lose. And I don't understand why people don't understand that basically when you have someone who's nothing left to lose, they're the most dangerous people in the world. Are you fainting?
No, but so then why doesn't that happen more? I mean, I know a lot of people help. I know there's a lot of charitable giving. I know there's a lot of empowerment, but it just seems like there's enough financial resource to make that happen, whether you give people money in their pocket or you provide access to housing, healthcare, education, resources for survival. It just seems like a solvable problem.
There's only one little teeny problem with that system. And it begins with the letter C, and it is one of the Earth's greatest interferences on the planet. And it's not corporation, it's corruption. And we have we used to be relatively corruption free. Today, we're among we may be one of the most corrupt among the Western developed countries. But corruption takes money. It creates economic inefficiencies where the money goes to people who don't need it because they want it. And the people who need the money never see it because it's siphoned off. Until you are able to deal with corruption, and that is one of history's greatest nightmares. You can go through the United States. Why the tech bros have so much money? Corruption. These guys basically are given tax breaks because they have the money to lobby. They hire lawyers to do this stuff. They have probably 50, 100 accountants making sure they pay the least amount of tax possible. Their lobbyists are paying for the political campaigns of the people who are going to vote on their taxes. They get government contracts because for the most part, unless you are manufacturing a mass demand product, the place where you get your big bucks, like, for example, the government wants to order a weapons system. Well, an ordinary, I make little things here with my hammer or my welder. They're not going to get those government contracts. It's the big tech bros who can hire the biggest naval architecture firms in the world who have access to all kinds of steel, all kinds of stuff, getting government contracts. It perpetuates until you say, no, we're not doing that anymore. If our founding fathers really had an objective look at the way wealth is skewed today, and remember, they come from a society that was 95% agrarian, they would blanch. And that's the Associate Attorney General, and he is Blanche. But okay.
So how do we stop corruption, Peter?
Well, what I find is the cycle of history is people get so pissed off at corruption, they overthrow the government, and within a few years, the government that is taken over becomes the source of corruption. I think at some point we're going to have to face the fact that corruption needs to be stamped out. Look at the ethics. We got a Supreme Court justice driving a luxury, mobile home. We have people, I won't mention Kash Patel by name. Oops, I did. He's having an armored BMW made for him and a few high-ranking FBI. What is this about? He's a cop. Cops don't ride very expensive luxury vehicles in their daily pursuit. We keep doing these things. He wants a new jet. Pam Bondi wants a new jet. Hey, everybody wants a new jet, except those who know we're never going to go near them, and we're going to stand in long airport lines and feel terrible about that process. Corruption starts at every level. And if you see it, I lived in a country. I was a son of a U.S. diplomat. We lived in Beirut, Lebanon. We had something I call rate card corruption. They didn't pay the government bureaucrats enough. So you knew when you went to a government office to get something approved, there was a markup. It was a pre-agreed. Everybody knew what it was. So it was, in effect, you're paying the salary directly through corruption. But that's not the way it works at the top. When you start with Donald Trump making billions and billions of dollars for his family, that's mega corruption, and that has to stop by voters saying, we will not tolerate that anymore. No matter whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or a demagogue, at the end of the day, if you come into a political office, and because of that political office, you are increasing your and your family's net worth 50 times, 100 times, stop it. Stop voting for these people. They're all lying. Anyone who says, oh, well, I didn't, and they're Democrats who've done this stuff. Look at the guys arrested on FBI sting. As long as we don't do something serious about it, it ain't going to stop. And if it's the way you justify governing a country from the top, it legitimizes corruption, and that is unacceptable. We need to stop that. Gen Z, get the hell in charge of this country. Stop it. We need you. Get here. Do it. Help.
That's it.
That's it. Well, everybody, you won't have to suffer with me anymore until next time. Happy holidays. If I'm catching you before they've happened and happen afterwards, hope you had good ones. But whatever you do today, throw a little kindness in a place where no one expects it. Thank you. Until next time.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.